Welcome everybody to our first Ask Me Anything. Today we're talking about supporting English learners in every subject. The goal for today is just to talk about not only what does that support look like, but how can you tailor it and fit the needs of the needs that your students have. I'm joined today by my colleagues Alexa and Mimi. And they'll help us talk more about using data and the different types of support structures that we often use at Tutored by Teachers. Just a full disclaimer, you may hear different terms used in place of English learners today, multilingual learners, bilingual emergent. Just know that we're all talking about the same group of students, especially in our work across different states, districts. We see and hear people use those terms interchangeably, but just know that when it comes to today's topic, we're talking about the same group of students. Today, just to ask a question or have a question that kind of grounds us all in the same work, what are your current needs for your English learners? And we asked that question because we realized that our multilingual learners are not a monolith. Students have different proficiency levels. They have different backgrounds. They come from different countries, learn different languages and different dialects. And for us, we just want to make sure that we take their backgrounds and their data and are able to provide the very specific supports that they need in order to be successful. And what does that look like today? We are going to show you how we use student data to determine the best support for English learners, in addition to sharing how high dosage tutoring is high dosage tutoring. It helps multilingual success in basically any core content area. So, with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Alexa, and she'll tell you more about a little bit about Tutor by Teachers and how we support English learners. So, Alexa, take it away.
Thanks so much, Bruce. I'm so excited to talk about how our small group tutoring model is so particularly impactful for a variety of student needs and particularly our English language learners. We overall are just using our evidence-based principles to serve students in everything we do. And I'm going to talk about them here. And then I'm going to dive in even more detail about what that looks like for various groups and populations in the English learner umbrella. So to start out with just what we do, how the TBT difference. We are an outcomes focused tutoring intervention, high dosage tutoring. We it's in the name. We're using US certified and experienced teachers, teachers who have US K-12 experience. And when we're serving English learners, we go even further. We want to make sure that these are teachers who have had trainings and experience serving these populations to really optimize their skill set to provide the scaffolds that they need. And we're really passionate about having that consistent teacher throughout the term because, I mean, think about it with English language learners. Oftentimes there's an element of I'm a little bit shy when I have to speak or I have to, try something that feels like a little bit out of my comfort zone. Having a consistent teacher that they can build rapport with in a lot of cases may speak their home language or have us share a cultural background. It'll really be a opportunity for them to build rapport, comfort, and kind of that safety to try take risks and really grow their English language proficiency. So they're going to meet with that teacher consistently and they're going to get to know their gap areas, their learning styles, and where they need to be really pushed and supported. Um, we're always, as a high dosage tutoring model, scheduling our interventions regularly. We're really aiming for that high dosage in the name of high dosage tutoring, which means meeting multiple times a week, trying to hit that critical dosage to make an impact. And we try to keep it standards aligned, skills aligned, and we're all virtual, but we make it work because we're able to bring our expert teachers to all corners of the country to serve students right where and when they need it. We've even served migrant education populations in hard to reach places as long as they can get a device and an internet connection, even a mobile booster pack. We're able to bring the teacher right to them. So it's a really powerful model. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more about what that looks like, how we really inform our instruction and our supports for English learners and using data along the way. So, the first thing we do is I'm just going to get tactical here. We want to know you guys have data usually, or anything you have, English proficiency data, could be WIDA, TELPAS. We know there's a lot of different tests out there. We would love to process your data. Actually, my colleague Mimi here is our data specialist, and she's going to be running those numbers and making sure that we know what the latest information on that student's proficiency is, down to that domain level of reading, writing, speaking, listening, and all of those pieces. And then we will Smart group. We love this term because it's so key to what we do. We have an opportunity with small groups to get them with similar students with similar needs. And so we're able to smart group by proficiency level down to, we have a 5-to-1 ratio max, but I mean, English learners, maybe it's 3-to-1, maybe it's 2-to-1. Maybe you even want to do 1-to-1 for a student with very, significantly interrupted formal education or SLIFE student. So you're able to really match the cohorts that you're building based on the needs that that group has so that they can get the most targeted, which I think is already previewing. Yep, each cohort, they're going to get the instruction that they need. And I'm going to talk more about that on the next slide. And along the way, we have to just point out we're giving daily progress monitoring. All of our offerings have that built in, and there's live visibility of that in an admin dashboard for you all. So, what does it mean to match them to the offering that they need? You guys see, I made sure not to show you all of this at one time. I'm a teacher and I got to give it to you piece by piece. There are actually at least 4 different offerings we can kind of put together to serve these different needs based on how we can just add some tweaks to our core model of small group skills based high dosage tutoring. So, the first one is taking our bread and butter ELA and math small group high dosage tutoring intervention, and we're just going to layer in EL supports. That's really good for those students who are kind of at that intermediate level. Maybe they're a level 3 and above. You still want them to be ultimately learning ELA and math outcomes or standards aligned instruction, and that's your goal, but these students need EL supports. So what does that look like? When I say EL supports, it means we're going to staff a teacher tutor who has that expertise, and that person is going to make sure, but through our trainings, to have that scaffolding, those visuals, the sentence starters, the, extra vocabulary support, that emphasis on academic vocabulary that these long-term Ls often get stuck in when they're at a grade level in their ELA and math work, right? So we're layering that on top of our ELA and math tutoring. So that's one level, one offering. Now, the next one is okay, everything I just said, but we also have a bilingual element. And this is really good for the students who, we can click next one, are at that level just below. They're kind of in that emerging level, maybe like a level 2 on WIDA or the equivalent on a TELPAS or test like that. Where they're at that emerging level, they are, maybe you still want them to have ELA and math outcomes, but you want them to have that bilingual support because they're still most comfortable in thinking and speaking in their native language. So the outcome here is still English language based outcomes in ELA and math, but the teacher tutor now has fluency in the student's home language and can even leverage that home language in the content to kind of build bilingual content and use that to kind of translanguage and scaffold back to the English language outcomes. So that's a little more intensive, but it's something we do. And then we get to ELD, or English language development. This is that explicit designated ELD offering where students are usually newcomers. They're that level 1 student who is often recently arrived to the country, and they really need their goal not to be main idea and details or math, right? They need their goal to be focused on gaining English language proficiency across reading, writing, speaking, and listening in English. So their goal and their actual content is more around English vocabulary, um, grammar, things like that from the most foundational levels. And we're going to make sure that the teacher staff there is someone with experience teaching, English as a language from that level. And they can also optionally have home language ability. Maybe it's good for kind of like a supporting a cross-cultural connection. And we also have served dual language schools or just in general, just done our intervention completely in Spanish, for example, or other common languages. This has been great. We worked with some dual language schools who they wanted us to cover tutoring for their math in Spanish or Spanish language arts block. And we were able to do that fully. And the assessments in that one are in that home language or designated language, target language. So that's good for dual language schools. It could also serve math for newcomers. Math in their home language for newcomers is another way that that offering gets used. Great. And then just to point out, on top of all of that, as if that's not enough, we have two more additional supports where we can support early literacy for students who have maybe not encountered literacy in with the English alphabet yet, either or in their home language, and also trauma informed approach. So how do we serve all of these students? How do we have all these different needs? And when I talk to folks, they're like, yeah, well, I can think of students in all these categories. So how do you serve them all at the same time? That's where I'm going to throw it over to Mimi, and she's going to talk about what the data shows is really impactful way to do that.
Yep, as Alexa mentioned, we're working to really tailor the work that we do to serve diverse needs. And over again, research has proven that tutoring is one of the most effective tools in a district's toolbox for acceleration. One way as a researcher that we measure acceleration is a metric called effect size. And this measure compares the academic growth of students who were receiving an intervention to those who didn't receive it. Here we have a color scale that's based on work from John Hattie at Harvard, and he's just helping us to organize these different effect sizes into something visual and as well into something that helps us understand how much or measure against different interventions, how much is the impact of different intervention types. So on our arrow on the scale here is the arrow for meta studies of tutoring. The NBER and others have done meta studies, so studies of studies, aggregating lots of data together to show that the impact of tutoring is 0.37, which is classified as a strong impact on Hattie's spectrum. And it really just boils down to districts knowing or schools that this is equivalent to extra months of learning without actually having extra months of learning in your school year. So students during the school day receiving high dosage tutoring are growing extra months on your assessments just from participating in this program when it's personalized and implemented to meet their needs. So we don't just look at national research at Tutored by Teachers, we also look at our own programs. This is an example of an early literacy program. So one of the most frequent goals that schools have for their elementary age English learners is foundational literacy growth. And our explicit and systematic program for foundational literacy is a really great option when you couple it with those bilingual and EL supports that Alexa mentioned. In this specific case, a school was able to share their DIPLS data with us and their oral reading fluency of the students who were in tutoring in the blue bar was almost double. They almost made a double growth from 32 ORF to or oral reading fluency rate to 61 by the end of the year. And that was also nearly double that of the students who did not receive tutoring there in the yellow. And the great outcome for the school was that not only did the students receive great, very targeted intervention that supported their literacy on a small level, they also were a school that was able, with these intervention supports, to make the highest WEDA growth in the state. Um, with that scaffold and with that being involved in their entire academic program, those students in that school were actually lauded as having some of the strongest supports for English language learners and making incredible growth. And then another example, going at those bilingual and dual language supports, we worked with a school where our tutors were embedded and speaking the language that the student was taught in and tutoring in the language aligned to the language of instruction. So when we paired tutors with Spanish speaking students and Spanish speaking tutors together, we saw that the growth of the students in tutoring outpaced the growth of those not in tutoring by 14 points. And the overall growth for the program was at 8 points, but that just points to the effectiveness of really targeting what students need, making sure that tutoring is not just a broad based intervention, but a very targeted intervention where we look at exactly what students need and make sure that the curriculum is cohesive and the tutor is also well paired to drive really strong outcomes for students.
There you go. Lost my audio button for a second. Thank you so much, Alexa and Mimi, for sharing. How do we use data to find out like what's the best support and intervention for our EL, multilingual, and emergent bilingual students. In addition to just spotlighting like how the impact and the power of high dosage tutoring and like how it's making an actual impact on students and their outcomes. So before we go to in our closing and next steps, we just want to be able to take time to address some common questions that we've gotten. And these questions were submitted beforehand, and we figured they'd be a great time, not only to answer the question, but also give some context to it. So I'll ask the question, and me and Alexa, either one of you can come off a mic and just share your responses to it. But one of the questions that we got is I've heard a lot of different options from staff. Some believe support is teaching students in their native language. What are some of the most common misconceptions you see about English learners?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I work really closely with some amazing content specialists in this field, and this one comes up a lot, really well intentioned, thinking, if you want your student to interact with someone who shares their cultural background, particularly maybe if there's no one in your staff who does and you feel like that would be really powerful, that is a worthy part of the goal. But we also have to remember that often the goal is academic attainment in the English courses that they're in throughout their day. And so we have to keep that goal really strongly in mind that purely instruction purely in their language in that context, like in a dual language school, it's a different context, a different goal. If they have accommodations to do an assessment in their native language, great, that's a different goal. But if their goal is for academic attainment in English language, we always want to be using native language as a bridge and using really intentional translanguaging moments as a bridge back to really fostering understanding, building vocabulary, and building comprehension in English language across the four domains. So I think that while it often comes from a well-intentioned place, it is not the full strategy. There are so many powerful strategies that sometimes I've even seen amazing English language development or ELD teachers able to work with students in a language they don't speak. Thai, in a student from Uzbekistan, like maybe don't even speak that language, but their strategies on how to scaffold the English language instruction is so strong and so broken down, rooted so much in the science of learning that they're able to make huge gains with that student. And unfortunately, we've also seen instruction in the world where just purely speaking to the student in their native language never bridges back to them understanding in English, and it won't translate back to seeing that in their class, in their um assessments all the time unless we're helping them make connections there with the academic vocabulary that they're gonna see to be able to navigate those academic situations in English. So, really great question.
Thanks for that. As a younger educator, that was one of my biggest misconceptions. It was like, hey, the EO teacher's just going to come in and translate and tell them everything I just said in English in their native language, and it's like that's not the case. So, thanks for that response, Alexa. Oh, there we go. Our next question that we had is the person said, we're investing more in core instruction, but I want to make sure we're not missing something for our ELs or English learners. What's one thing schools often overlook when trying to support EL students across subjects?
I'll add a little bit, maybe if you wanna add anything to that. I think that, we tutor in math and ELA, and I think that oftentimes it's just that extra layer of scaffolding, that can unlock the core instruction understanding, and I'm gonna go back to academic vocabulary, right? Sometimes, a math teacher might think, "Well, I'm just teaching a math concept." Well, if they don't know the academic vocabulary of what slope means or what write an equation really is asking them to do, they might not be able to perform on that question or assessment item, and in fact, sometimes when we look at our math assessments, they're very language rich, and so we wanna be able to teach them to navigate the academic language in all domains, and I think that means every teacher, needs to have some English language, strategies in their pocket to unlock that learning for students. Um, Mimi, anything you wanna add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe double down on some of what you mentioned, which is every student is learning academic vocabulary and language throughout their educational journey. And so those standards that we're using as we're tracking different programs, that when we incorporate those language goals, every student benefits. I think sometimes people think, okay, well, I have to do this because I have, ELs or EBs in my class, but just incorporating those things as stock elements of lessons, stock things that we track of what actually were the language targets of the math lesson, what were the language targets of the history lesson, help us all to become constantly just recognizing that academic language is not spoken in the homes of any student at we don't speak in the same ways that we do on a test, and so the more we can support students to be successful with that academic language and all be internalizing that, across the board, I think that just really helps support our students to grow, and for every student to be supported without it having to be that extra lift or that extra piece, so
Wow, that's so great. One other thing I just thought of is I'm thinking about partners of ours at schools that are just coming to us for general high dosage tutoring. And then they realize as they're making the roster, like, oh, I have a couple of students in this mix that are English learners. And that's part of the beauty of what Mimi and her team does with the data analysis is we could have that mixture and use our smart grouping to make sure that just those cohorts have a really specific focus with those uh scaffolds and support. So I think that's a cool thing of you don't have to only come to us with just English learners in mind. They might be part of the broader, um, tapestry of students, not to be very poetic, that you're looking to serve and we can still serve them.
That was very poetic, but I think it was appropriate. Thank you, Alex. No, thank you for those responses, and I think, even, as a former educator, like, these are all things that I wish people had told me at the beginning of my teaching journey, but it changes your mindset, but it also lets you know that, hey, it's not impossible to support English learners, you just kinda have to rethink and, reframe how you kind of see support or what you think support looks like. With that said, thank you all for your time this afternoon. It was such a pleasure just being able to hear from both Alexa and Mimi about we're using data to inform specific supports for students. And in addition to seeing like what that data actually looks like. We want to thank you all again for joining us. On the screen, you'll see a QR code if you want to scan to book more time to learn about Tutored by Teachers and our approach to supporting English learners, and how we also use data to inform those support structures as well. Again, thank you again, and we'll hopefully we'll see you next time for our next Ask Me Anything. Take care, everybody.